And you're good to start.
Good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started with introduction and get the program underway to be respectful of everybody's schedule. For those I don't know, my name is Doug Reeder, and I'm Executive Chairman and Co-founder of Sterling Seacrest Pritchard. We appreciate you all coming out and joining us today, and thanks to all those folks who are on board remotely. We are one of the largest privately held independent insurance brokers in the Southeast. We work in partnership with our clients and community to provide services and support customized to today's dynamic marketplace. Our firm has a client-first philosophy and a robust resource platform delivered by almost 300 colleagues across 6 offices in the Southeast. One of our historic differentiators has always been in deep industry verticals and with dedicated teams, including healthcare, construction, real estate, and hospitality, transportation, logistics, nonprofits, and private client risks. We also have a large benefits consulting practice, which is industry agnostic. We are broker owned with a common long-term perspective and a commitment to educating and informing, which is manifested in today's program. We've actually been doing these programs since we moved into this building in 2013, so this is 9 years. So we're really pleased with the reception that we've had, the regular turnout that we get. We're very pleased to have back Tina Nazier, Managing Director at Wipfli. For those who don't know, Wipfli is a national accounting and consulting firm that works together with their clients to bring integrated solutions by helping to turn data into insights, to optimize workflows, to help increase margins, and to facilitate organizational transformation. Today, she's going to show us how to explore the opportunities available to bring multiple generations together for the greatest impact on your business. We're all dealing with this clearly, and the enhanced challenges from the last 2 years for sure. We'll identify how to work together during rapid change and identify strategies and tactics for successfully developing and coaching the next generation talent. As a leader in Wipfli's organizational performance team, Tina focuses her talent in helping clients effectively address their strategic, people, and operational challenges. She's a frequent guest speaker and guest lecturer at business organizations around the country, various different business meetings and association gatherings, which I think is where we connected on last year. I mean, she's a repeat speaker here. We had very good response to her last time, so we really appreciate having her back. She's got 25 years of experience in strategy, leadership, professional coaching, organization, and cultural development. We're very pleased to have her here.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Doug. And thank you for inviting me back. And I love being part of your group. I think we are all today facing so many issues around workforce and how do we engage each generation in the workforce. But today we're really going to talk about, let's just get a little bit better understanding of what drives each generation. How might we think about that a little bit differently as we're trying to come up with a comprehensive workforce strategy that works for our company. So as Doug said, I spent my entire career really in the strategy space, and that includes comprehensive workforce strategy. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to explore the characteristics and strengths of each generation. And I want to just kind of say one thing about this. Think about generational personalities as things that make them unique, but not everyone in that generation will have those same unique characteristics. So I don't want us to think today we're going to have a cookie cutter approach to how to work with each generation. We still have to understand and identify the uniqueness of each individual and respect them for that. We're also going to identify how to work together in rapid change. And most of us, if we are involved in anything that relates to recruiting the next workers in our settings, we know we've got to be pretty quick about this. So how do we make sure that we're addressing this from a rapid change perspective? And then discuss where generations may collide. We all probably have examples of how maybe one generation may have not thought the same way as the other generation. And maybe we don't always see eye to eye. So we'll talk a little bit about where some of those are, but also how we have such a great opportunity to collaborate And then I'll identify some strategies and tactics for how we can successfully develop and coach that top next generation of talent. So let me just start with this slide. It's the US Census Bureau. And, you know, I always like to start with the big why around this. We all are feeling the pressure of workforce shortages, workforce retention, and so on. But interestingly enough, if you look at this slide from the US Census Bureau, you'll actually see that the US labor demand exceeded supply as far as back to probably around the 2012-13 or so year, which basically says, according to the Census Bureau, we've not had enough people to fill all of the demand that we have probably for close to 10 years already. Now think about that in your companies. If you think back 5 years from now, did you feel the same pressure and tension about trying to find a strong candidate for a job as you do now? So some things have changed in that time frame. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but I always find this very interesting because it seems like we feel like this has been an issue only in the past couple of years, but actually the problem's been around a lot longer. We may or may not have felt that tension. So interesting facts. In February of 2020, this is pre-COVID, 70% of US businesses actually reported a talent shortage. This was prior to COVID. And this was more than double the 32% that reported in 2015. And as of March 2021, 19 million Americans filed for some sort of jobless benefits, with the majority of them citing pandemic relief, despite the record number of job openings. Interesting fact. So what's causing this shortage? Obviously, COVID, we've seen, I'll say a stronger exit of our baby boomer generation. Probably over 1 million more baby boomers said during the COVID situation, hey, you know what? I'm done with this. I don't need to be in the middle of this anymore. I'm going to retire early. Or their companies said, hey, you know what? We've got some issues we're trying to address from a productivity or from a profitability perspective. And yeah, maybe you want to think about, well, do you really want to continue on here? Maybe we can give you some nice packages to have you decide to move on. But the average net worth of those was about 1.2 million. We also had record low labor force participation. Basically, thousands of Americans voluntarily opted out of the workforce. Voluntarily, for whatever reason. I need to take care of a sick family member. Hey, I just don't want to be exposed to this. There are other benefits for me that I can get versus having to work full time. Whatever that reason is, they just voluntarily opted out of the workforce. And birth rates hit a 35-year low in 2019. And the relative size of the working age population has been shrinking ever since. So all of these factors, considering now the average family size is 2 children versus the 4 children it was when our boomers were having children, all of those really create this in process of the shortage of our workforce. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the generations in our workforce, because that's really why we're here today, is to really talk about the generational personalities. But look at the statistics here. In 2020, you can see the makeup of our population, 42% of our workforce distribution was in the millennial generation. And we were down, boomers were probably around that 24% and Xers were 30%. By the year 2030, it's projected that 44% of our population will still be millennials, but look where our Gen Zers are, 22%, our Xers are 25%, and our boomers are down to 9%. Now think about for a moment in your company, especially in your leadership team. Think about that makeup of who are those folks in your leadership team. Are they made up of traditionalists? Are they made up of boomers? Are they made up of more Xers or millennials? Think about that for a moment. A lot of times what we see in leadership teams is there's a higher concentration of the way that 2020 model looks like. If we are to really be successful at helping us understand how to not only engage, but also to motivate each generation in the workforce, we have to think a little bit differently about how the generational diversity looks within our companies. And today isn't about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I could spend a whole session just on talking about generational diversity as well. So let me move to how to really, let's think about this generational personality, if you will, and what makes each generation tick. So understanding those generations, really how they are formed are the events and the conditions that they faced during their most formative years. And typically the most formative years are around that 8 to 9-year-old level. Most of us are hardwired, believe it or not, by the time we're in that age category, which is great to an extent, but not so good in some other aspects. Think about those children who have not had an easy upbringing and how that's shaped who they are. Think about those children who have had wonderful opportunities in those formative years and how that has affected who they are as well. But as a result, there are unique events and conditions, and each of those create what we call a generational personality. So what I want to do next is I really want to talk about what's created that generational personality within each of those generational groups. And then maybe how can we use that information to be more effective as we continue to attract and retain and grow and develop our workforce. Because honestly, we're not going to get any more people. We're going to have to figure out how to engage what we have, and then maybe think a little bit differently about what we need to have done. So let's start with the baby boomer generation. That generation is typically between 1946 and 1964. The major events that they were influenced by there was the big aftermath of World War II going on right now during that time frame when these baby boomers were in their formative years. Think about the impact of a post-World War II environment on these kids. Think about the Vietnam War. And how many of you in this room have at least a family member that you can trace back to being some participant in the Vietnam War? Yeah, pretty much all of us. So when I think about that war and how taxing and how emotionally costing that was on all of us, I think about the impact of this generation. The Cuban Missile Crisis was going on. We had the first man on the moon. We had an explosion in consumer products during that era, because basically we started to come out of that post-war era and think, you know what, we could be doing more. There are more things that we can create. Wow, we need more items of convenience, if you will. So those all created a generational personality of, wow, we're going to be a bit more optimistic. Look at the gloom and doom we came from. Let's think of what could be next. We made it through that. We've thrived through that. So they're going to be optimistic about what's to come. There is also a bit of a competitive nature in our baby boomer population, and I'm not going to ask anybody in this room to divulge what generation you're in, or those of you that are online. Thank you for joining us, by the way. But I'm going to say that there are some competitive qualities of that group. They're also a very dedicated group. Think about your baby boomers in most cases. Those are the ones that believe in that long-term affiliation, that loyalty, that dedication. You'll find a number of these baby boomers that have been in the same company most of their or all of their career. They're also a generation that thinks about the command and control way of work. Most of the folks in that generation, and again, I'm gonna be very careful with my words here, because I don't want us to stereotype anybody in this generation. But typically a generational personality in this group is that more command and control. Okay, I know because of the history here, we were in control. I have a command. I have someone that's telling me what to do. I'm going to respect that. I'm going to be that person that's doing that. So it was more of a command type of a thinking process. Then we move into this next generation, our Gen Xers. This generation had some really unique influencers. Everything from the dot-com era think about that for a moment. Everything was .com. You could start to, see things out on the internet with that. But we had Michael Jordan out there and J. Simpson trial. Does anybody remember the trials and how that was broadcast across pretty much every station? This is the first generation that had 24-hour media. Think of the boomers. You had one radio in the house or one television in the house. Now you've got a generation that has been exposed to 24-hour media. You also have the Gulf War in this era, as well as the divorce rates skyrocketed for our Generation Xers. They started to realize, you know what, that continuous life of that one individual and that constancy, you know what, if I'm not really happy with that, I'm going to move on. I want to find something else. I think it was more, people were more aware of it in this generation. There's also the start of the technology revolution, and you'll see a little theme with this as you go through the next generations. So that created a generational personality of resourcefulness. It's like, okay, if we're going through this 24-hour media, I should be able to figure out how to really think differently. We never had that before. How can we be a bit more resourceful in our thinking? Independence. This generation was more independent than even the baby boomer generation. They started to realize that you could really go in any dimension if you wanted to. And in this generation, work is just work. It's not the entire life cycle or the lifestyle like in the boomer generation. But you know what? Work is a means to get you to an end result. And you were dedicated to your work and you were aligned with your work and you were committed to your work. Work is work and you're going to do it. This generation was a bit more skeptical than the prior one as well, because they realized that through all of these changes, think about the recession that they started to experience and the market crashes. And it's like, you know what, maybe things aren't going to be all that glowing after what we've gone through. And we need to be a little more critical about what we're doing. And this group started to be a bit more on the self-command. So remember the prior one, it was more command and control, I'm in charge. This group wants to be in command and control as well, but they believe that we all self-regulate and that self-command is an important part of being successful. So that's our Generation X. Our millennials are our next generation in the workforce. And remember, do you remember what percentage of that population is in the workforce right now? Yeah, a little bit over 40. It's going to get more over 40 here in the next 6 to 7 years. This is a pretty large percentage of our population right now. So for those of us that aren't in this millennial population, you are probably working with someone in this millennial population. And it is a wonderful opportunity to think differently, because look what this generation went through. Their formative years, or shortly thereafter, were right around that September 11th of 2001. Now, I bet if I asked most of you in this room, where were you on September 11th when we started to see the news stories and the planes crashing into the towers? I bet almost everyone can tell me where they were at the point where they first heard about that. So that was a huge influencer on this generation. We also had President Obama, one of our first presidents with his type of a background elected. We had Columbine, we had the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Facebook came alive for this generation, and Pinterest. Technology was continuing to evolve, and this is where the World Wide Web hit. And this is where we started to have everything be connected. So obviously this generation is very idealistic. They think about what could be, and let's get there. They also think about diversity. Now we'll start to see a theme with diversity as well, because this generation, remember, they want to be in control, but they also believe that in order to be most effective, we have to have a diverse way of thinking. So we start to see an appreciation for diversity in the workforce. There's also an enthusiasm with our millennials because of some of that idealism and where they think we can go, and some of the things that we have weathered through, some of these storms that they have weathered through. There is an enthusiasm around what could be. There's also this desire for instantaneous whatever, okay? Think about it. Now you can look anything up on the World Wide Web. I can get my answer like that. I don't have to go to the library anymore. I don't have to read the newspaper to get my news. It's all right here at my fingertips. So that has created that instantaneous requirement in their minds. And this group doesn't want command and control. They want collaborate. This is the group that says, you know what? I appreciate the way you want to control this. How about we have part of a discussion around how we could be better at that? So this group is going to be much more collaborative. We've now moved from the boomers to be command and control to the Xers that want to be more part of kind of self-directed. Now this group wants more collaboration. So keep that theme in mind, because we're going to talk about how that's going to affect how we can be better at leading these generations. My clicker stopped working, Katie. Can you maybe advance my slide? I don't know why that's not going. Sorry. Temporary technical issue here. We will fix. There we go. Thank you. So now we have Gen Zers. This is our group born between 97 and 2012. This group was very affected by COVID-19. Think of the years to come, how this will completely reshape our history in the last 2 years. The Great Recession of 2008, some of this group was younger during that time frame. Some of them weren't even born yet. But think about the impact of that recession. That was probably the first recession that many of us ever went through. And it created some really, I will say it, life-changing and work-changing impact. And then we had social networking. We started to see issues like gun violence come to the front of the stage. We've got climate change issues going on. This is where we started to see more along the lines of corporate social responsibility. Hang on to that one because it'll help figure out why some of this generation thinks the way they do. This group is always wired. I can't think of a time where I can't look at my 17-year-old son and see his phone in his hand, or it's in his pocket and he's got his earbuds in. This generation is always hooked up to something, whether it's listening to music, whether it's listening to the news, whether it's looking up different videos, they're just constantly on. And we're also dealing with really quick responses like one-click purchasing. We're also looking at higher education costs. Secondary education in this country is just really a very big issue right now. And we need to get our arms around that. So that created generational personality for our Gen Z population to be much more pragmatic and realistic. It's like, you know, we love the pie in the sky, but hey, looking at all these things that we're facing right now, we got to be realistic about where we're going to go and how we're going to get there as well. This group is also very independent and entrepreneurial in their thinking. I'm working with a client or talked to the clients, let's see, it would have been back in February of this year. And this gentleman was 24 years old. He and his college buddy just started a construction business in the Midwest. They are doing the full real estate acquisition. They are then doing construction and renovation, and they're doing the rental side. They started out their company like a year and a half ago. They were at $1 million, I think, roughly that first year. They will realistically get close to 100 million in this next year because of the type of work that they're doing and the partnerships they've made. These guys are 24 years old. Think about the impact that this generation is going to have on all of us. Then we've got the financially responsible, and they want stable jobs. And that gentleman I just talked to you about was in the prior generation as well, one of his partners. But this group really wants to be fiscally responsible. They want to know that they're going to have some security around their future. They want stable jobs. Now, let me make sure that I don't make that sound like they're going to be consistently in the same job, but stability in their jobs. They also expect diversity and equality. This is our most diverse generation in history. They no longer kind of appreciate it. It needs to be part of the day-to-day. And they will I think we'll feel successful with this generation when we stop talking about diversity and equity and inclusion, because it's what we're doing anyway. There's no extra, oh, let's figure out a strategy for DEI. It's just how we're working anyway, and it just becomes part of our nature. These are also the digital natives. Everything from using Slack for communications to creating their own videos and Snapchat and you name it. And then this group is very vocal. They expect to have a voice. So when you're working within your companies with your Gen Zers and you have a command and control leadership and they are being, suffocated by not being able to share a voice or be part of the dialogue, we're going to lose many folks in this generation because they want to have a voice. They want to be heard. They expect that collaboration and they expect to listen. Or expect to be listened to, excuse me. The other thing I'll say about this generation is, remember one of the last slides I said work is work? This generation's work is a means to get to the other things that they want in their lives. So they're working because they want to get X, they want to get here, they want to do that. So work is a means to get them to their personal goals. Very different mindset than some of us in this room have had, that work is there because we are just really driven by what we do. Work is part of getting them to an outcome from a personal perspective in many cases. So a little different way of thinking about those generations. And then of course, we've got another generation coming up. A couple more things about Generation Z here. 30% of Gen Z would take a 10 to 20% pay cut to work for a company with a mission they deeply care about. So if you want to engage that generation, you better make sure that they align to your vision, your mission, they get where you're going, they get how they connect to it and where they fit in. 77% of this generation expect to work harder than previous generations, believe it or not. So we've had some generations that have had their ups and downs with kind of how much effort and energy they put into things. This generation expects to work harder. They also, 50% though would like to retire before age 60, but 54% expect to work until they're 61 to 70 years old. So half of them would like to retire, but they expect to probably work between 61 to 70. And their qualities that they really value in a manager is honesty and integrity and mentoring ability. Those were the top rated ones. And look at this top 7 job search priorities here. Their top one is, do they have growth opportunities within that company? Second is, do they have generous pay? And you know what? We're driving a lot of that pay requirement as well, because we know that we've been more flexible with our comp plans, I think, than we have in prior years, because we know companies are looking to attract more people through a comprehensive pay strategy that's probably higher than they've paid in the past. An example in healthcare, a lot of traveling nurses during this COVID situation, which drove up the demand for the current staffing to be able to be paid at more that, toward that rate of a traveling nurse. So we've created some of that. They want to feel like they're making a positive impact in something. Remember that need to do more, that need to be connected with the vision or the mission of the company, drive that value. Job security is also important to them. They want to know they're in a stable job, and if they choose not to be at that position anymore, they want it to be their choice. Not that the company isn't doing well and they're worried about their job, or not because they're not doing well. It's because they want to feel in control of that. Healthcare benefits, flexible hours, a manager to learn from. So those are all things to think about as you're looking at that Generation Z. And then we have these groups called the tweeners. Those are the folks that kind of are at the tail end of the prior generation and just at the very beginning of the next generation. What's cool about them, and you'll see there's like a baby boomer versus into the Xer to millennial to Gen Z. But those are the ones that are old enough to understand and at least acknowledge the prior generation, but young enough that they can connect with the generation that they're in or close to. And they share that common history, because then they can kind of connect between a couple of generations. So you probably are thinking of folks right now in your company that, wow, you know, they're kind of midway between these two and they connect well with either generation. So then look out, because we've got another generation coming, Generation Alpha, and who knows what in the world that's going to look like. But think about what this generation that's coming, born between 2013 and whoever, I don't even know if they've figured out what that generation end date is at this point. But I have to think that COVID's going to shape them as well. Because as you look at this generation, you know, right now that the youngest or the oldest in this generation is probably 9 years old or so. Think about what they're experiencing as their parents are going through COVID. It's like, oh, well, my mom and dad are at home all the time. Or I didn't get to go to school because I had to work from home on my computer and I didn't get to connect. I didn't get to socialize as much as I'd like to. So think about that. This next generation is coming, is going to be exposed to a lot of different things. We've had a lot of different political landscapes than we've had in the past as well. So I think all of those we'll have to look at shaping that generation. So employers are really doing more to align with that millennial and Gen Z population, because we're seeing more of that balance of those generations in our workforce, but we're also seeing that those are going to continue to grow and develop over the next few years. And I'm not going to read through everything on the slide here, but basically they're creating a diverse and inclusive work environment. Those are their interests. We have to focus on that. We have to focus on employee satisfaction. They expect us to have a positive impact on our local communities. So, but interestingly enough, this survey was done only through 2020, but we had a higher percentage of millennials who expected to leave their jobs in 2019 than we did in 2020. But if we were to expand that out to 2021, when that data comes, my guess is that number is going to go up a little bit again. So we'll see that flex of that generation and where they think they're going to be. So I'm going to pause here for a moment, first of all, to ask questions about any of those generational personalities, or if anyone has comments about any of that in your own settings. I don't know if there's anyone online. If you're online and you want to put something in the chat feature, please do so. Katie will catch us up to that as well. Well, I want to just quickly then move into just a very brief topic on this diversity, equity, and inclusion topic, because I think it's important for us, no matter which generation we have. And again, keep in mind the personalities are just possible ways that this generation thinks. It's not everyone in that generation is the same. But the main thing that I want you to get out of this is everyone has a seat at the table. And if we think about diversity and equity and inclusion, I'll give you my quick definition of that. Diversity means that you get a ticket to come to the dance, basically. Equity means you have your ticket and you come to the dance, but you actually, when you get there, you understand the music. Inclusion means you have your ticket to come to the dance, you come to the dance and you understand the music, but you also get asked to dance. That's my very rudimentary description of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So basically, if we think deeper around all of our generations in the workforce, they should all have a ticket to our table. They should all understand the music, basically, and they should all be participating and asked to dance. And that's the goal of each of our populations. No population is better nor worse than the last or the ones before them. They all bring those unique characteristics and qualities to the table. And if we are to continue to thrive in our environment or in our industries or within our company, we have to look at it from that perspective. It takes a whole village for us to be successful. And if we look at everyone within our team with that acknowledgement of all of the greatness that they bring because of who they are, what their backgrounds are, and how they can bring that together, that's going to make us a better company. So just a quick deeper dive on diversity. It differentiates based on what makes us unique. So think of the different generations and what makes us unique. Now, I will tell you that when I work with some clients, they don't always believe unique is better. And it depends on those individuals that are making the decisions in the companies. Some of them really don't want to embrace unique. Others are like, yes, we need more unique. They also respect differences in each of us and value them. So it's one thing to know the generational personalities or differences that each of us have, but it's another thing to say, you know what, we not only get that, but we value that and we are going to embrace that. And then it's the mix of people that really help create the greatest success. And I'm going to source Sonia Aranza here. She actually helped Wipfli create our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. Equity is really makes the mix of people work well, provides that cultural feeling of everybody belongs, and it actively engages all. And inclusion is truly acknowledging the generational differences as a great step toward making sure that we are achieving a more diverse culture. And those generational differences and applying those different ways of thinking is really imperative to an inclusive culture. Those companies that I've found that have been most successful have a diverse executive population where they are coming from different perspectives, they are valuing different perspectives, and they are comfortable. They feel very safe bringing their whole self to work, to the executive table. And those companies that are the most successful at that level have also figured out how to cascade that same comfort and safety and willingness to have everyone bring their whole self to work every day. So that's my couple of minutes on diversity and equity and inclusion. I will tell you that this COVID situation has not only helped shape the generational personality of those that I've mentioned, but I think you can take an element of COVID and say, I could throw that into every one of those generations and how it impacted each of the generations. The boomer generation, some of them, especially the older boomer generation, it created a lot of fear and anxiety. It created some desire to not socialize as much. You know, I think about every generation and there's so much going on, but there are all of these other things, COVID-19 aside. You know, we've got remote work and we've got life and work effectiveness. How do I blend my life with my work and not make one overshadow the other? You know, we've got more, I think there is so much, mental health has come to the forefront. We have seen so much more information out about mental health, so much more awareness, but I think more of a willingness than we've ever seen in the past for people to actually come out and say, hey, I need help. I work a lot in the construction industry, and I think we're known as the most unsafe industry, but we're also, our industry has 4 times higher the suicide rate of any other industry. So when I think about that, it's really all of those things also shape each of us, whether it doesn't really matter what generation that we're in. But there's a clear generational message in all of this, that the millennials and the Gen Zers have an expectation that organizations are truly going to invest in their growth and development and enable them to be successful. And I would say that when I look at these bullet points, it's not just in those generations. I think every generation has some element of this. But again, think of the largest population that you're going to have is going to be probably these 2 generations. So if you kind of apply this to all generations, you know you're going to hit the major things with these 2. But they want their voices heard. They want their ideas to be able to be solicited, and they want to feel like you're using them. And the worst thing that you can do is solicit ideas from people and then either kind of discount them or kind of put them aside and don't bother doing anything with them. You're better off not soliciting ideas and asking for people's voices. They want career paths. I want to, I'll mention to you that I did worked with a national group and they had a session on, they just had some students that had gotten out of college and they applied to their first and got their first jobs. And there were 3 panelists and they were asked what was the main reason that they selected their company. And they all said in the top 2 reasons, that company not only handed them an offer that had, here's the job, here's the compensation, here are the benefits, but they had a very clear visual of a solid career path for them in that company. So that did 2 things for them. It helped them realize that they could have a lifetime of growth within that company. But it also helped them say, you know what? They want more for me than I'm seeing right now in this role. And here's how they see that. And I would say if you don't have a good solid career pathing plan within your companies, you probably should consider pulling that together. And a good career path doesn't just have, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3, here's step 4. The best ones I've seen, here's the individual in the center, here are all the opportunities out there. And to have that dialogue with every individual to say, where are your career passions? Where can we help you grow?
I think it also gives you the opening to say, okay, you say you want this. We've got this leadership academy, or we've got this training development that you need to step up and take too. So I think it's, it opens the door for challenging people to say that the better pay comes with this other responsibility, but you have to do this as well.
Yes, and that's a great point, Doug. And I will say that the best part of a career pathing plan is it's a mutual responsibility. There's stuff that I have to do in order to get myself there. There's stuff that the company is willing to do to help me get there. And you know what? Sometimes my ideal future career state may not be in this company. It may be somewhere else. But think of the value you will offer to that individual to help them get to that ideal future career state. They may go somewhere else and you may have helped them go somewhere else, but you can bet you've created a lifetime relationship with those individuals so that if in fact that wasn't quite where that grass was greener, like we talked about the great resignation and now we're kind of seeing the great regret, always keep that door open. My philosophy is you may not be an employee right now, but you might be here in the future. You have a lifetime potential to be work in our company. And it may not be today, but you have the opportunity to always come back. They also want to make a positive social impact. And we want to make sure that we are ethical in our business and in our operations and in how we behave and in how we work together. But that positive social impact is really important. Think about what we want to have within our companies. What messages are we having about social impact and how are we helping our people embrace that and also influence? And then they embrace diversity and seek opportunities to take advantage of diversity. And I will say we will have won the battle with diversity, equity, and inclusion when we no longer have to even talk about it. It's just part of who we are and what we do. And they want us to enable financial security for them, knowing the company is secure and stable, but they also want competitive pay. Now, I will put a caveat on that competitive pay because that's a very different story today than competitive pay was 2 to 3 years ago. And we're seeing, I'll give you an example. I was working with a state association over in the Rocky Mountains, and the president of that association said to me, Tina, we had a company offer a position, a $300,000 sign-on bonus, plus they would double their salary if they stayed past the first year. And I'm like, oh, now there's a new twist on competitive pay, right? I don't know how many of us can pay that kind of a sign-on bonus and offered a double salary. So, I mean, we're just in uncharted territory with this competitive pay. But I always tell clients that make sure everything else in your company is aligned. Make sure that you've got the mission and the vision and the values, and you've got that solid option, career path, all of those things in a comprehensive workforce strategy so that pay is only one component. Because if you don't have the other things, people will leave for pay. And a lot of reasons why people leave is that, first of all, they may not even like working with their leaders. A lot of times they're getting along with their bosses is not the most successful, and they feel like, you know what, I got to go somewhere else because I don't like the person I'm working for. So make sure in your comprehensive workforce strategy, you have all of those other elements figured out, and pay will not be the only decision factor. And I will tell you that I've had a number of people, and I do exit interviews as well. And I've had a number of people that I've talked with about, kind of understanding why they're leaving. And I will always ask them the question, help me understand how that gets you to your ideal future career state. And I can't tell you the number of times where I've gotten blank stares of, I'm not quite sure. And it's really sad because no one had the conversation with them and they didn't even think about that. So I always say, if you don't have a solid career map or a career path, any old road's going to get you there because you don't have any idea where you're going to go. But if you help someone figure that out and get there, you've got a relationship for life. And also, all generations in the workforce will embrace that remote work opportunity. I can't think of any company right now that hasn't had some remote work, either possibilities or capabilities. I mean, I think about, when we think about rapid change, if I were to say how fast I thought, any company could have gone from a fully in-house workforce to, in many cases, a fully remote workforce. How long do you think that would have taken us if COVID hadn't have forced us to do that? Years, 5 to 10 years? I would guess at minimum 5 years. Most of us had to turn that around in a matter of a week. So we can do it. I mean, there's certainly opportunities for that, but we have to embrace remote work. We have to help achieve that work and life effectiveness. We have to have alternative work environments because not everybody wants to work remotely. I'm seeing a lot of the newer folks that we're hiring saying, you know what? I've had enough of this isolation in my computer by myself. I want to work with people again. But we also want to have work that positively impacts others. Oopsie, trying to use this incorrectly. So if we think about how COVID has impacted us, 69% of our companies restructured their teams during the pandemic. And what percentage of your company's employees have been laid off? We've had a number of layoffs and furloughs, but 69% of those surveys said their companies suffered those layoffs and 28% let go. But interestingly, we were talking a little bit earlier about how many of those positions were still available. We had lots of work available. We had a hard time getting the message out about here's what's out there. And we were so trying to come up with how to address these major changes in the workforce. So although we've had furloughs and layoffs, we still have plenty of positions available. We just needed to rethink how we were going to get that message out there. So when you learn how to lead each of those different generations, first of all, it starts with leading yourself. How self-aware are you? How self-aware are your leaders? How self-aware are your supervisors? Leading others, how understanding behavioral styles, those personalities, those generational differences, and then leading the business. Learn how to fit into a team, the strengths that you can bring to the team, how everybody is a diverse part of the success of the company. And I'm going to just skip through that because I think I just want to check our time here. Okay, so we got about 10 minutes left, roughly 15. Oh, okay, good. Then I'll not skip some of that. So I want to just quickly kind of close this section on why we should empower our people. And think about these questions as you're thinking about the content I've already shared with you. But what leadership changes are occurring in your company right now? Think about those generational personalities I just mentioned. Do you have a new Gen Zer coming in that you want to put in a supervisory position at some point? Do you have a baby boomer that may be struggling with how to work with each of the generations? What leadership changes are you seeing in your company, and how are the generational personalities affecting them? Do you have an owner retiring or selling in the business? We did a national survey. This one was for construction last year, and I think we had like 450 respondents of construction business owners. Of that 450 or so respondents, I think it was 85 to 90% of them said that they were going to be exiting the business in the next 5 years. Now think about that from an industry perspective, the impact of that leadership, that technical leadership, that knowledge, that skill and ability, that group leaving that industry. Now, there are going to be positives to that. There are going to be a different group, different ways of thinking around what we do in that industry. But think of all of the knowledge and just the history that we're going to lose. So business transition is a huge part of this as well. And 5 or fewer years away from the owner or leader retirement without an exit plan. So if you're in the process of thinking about, you know what, if I'm planning to leave the business or a business owner is, a lot of them don't even have an exit plan. You know, what's going to happen next? How am I going to transition this business? Is it a family business? I work with a lot of family businesses, and family businesses have some unique issues. Let's just say it out loud. You know, most of us, if we're not in a non-family owned business, we get to go to work and, you know, hopefully we get to leave work at work sometimes. Those of us that don't carry our work with us in our bag everywhere. But those of us that have a family business, you never really get away from it. You go home and you have dinner with the same family members in some cases, or you have a Sunday dinner or a weekend plan together or an evening event together or a birthday you got to get together with, and the business just keeps going on. So if there are issues with relationships in the family, that affects the business and vice versa. But many times if owners don't have that transition plan, we forget or we lose that opportunity to really successfully move that business to the next generation. Yes, Doug.
We were with a client the other day, and I do a lot of surety work in the
Mhm.
construction space. And
Mhm.
sureties are concerned about continuity
Yes.
because they're putting out multi-year bets. And they
Mhm.
want to know that if something happens to the management or the principals, that there's a plan because they've got exposure for multiple years.
Yes.
So it's a common occurrence for us to have that discussion. And
Mhm.
one of the guys in the room mentioned something that hadn't occurred to me this plainly before, which is relevant here, is that because this is the case in construction where, you know, this particular principal is 62 years old
Mm-hmm.
and they're growing at a really fast pace.
Yeah.
And at some point, it's going to become a competitive disadvantage for them to get talent if they don't have a plan that they can communicate to their people.
Mhm.
Because superstars want to know that there's a plan if they're
Yes.
joining a company where the principal's 62.
Mm-hmm.
And that in and of itself, I mean, I just hadn't heard it crystallized like that, but that is like, wow, that really rings the bell, you know, that this is like, it's going to put you back
Yes.
and you may have to pay more. You may have to do other things to overcome that headwind
Mhm.
if you don't address it. And
That's a great point, Doug. And I think about that, you know, think about the generations that want that stable work. If they're looking at an owner that's, you know, okay, even if you look younger than you are, they're still looking at you like, oh, you know, what's the plan for when she or he is no longer in the business? Will this business still be afloat? And, you know, you talked about being the surety company. I think you do Key Man and Key Woman insurance. And we work with a lot of companies on how to make sure they have what we call the day after plan. Because in those cases, your top most influential leader in that company should have some kind of a, you know, plan to make sure that if they're not able to show up the next day, that business is going to keep going. And a lot of times we see in the family business setting that there is not always that solid plan, or we're afraid to talk about it because we have a couple of family members who want that, you know, that top position, and it becomes a little sticky and we don't really want to bring that up and it creates more tension. But definitely that ability to show that you have a stable leadership and a continual plan of how we're going to grow and develop as a company gives that every generation that security of knowing that, hey, you know what, this business isn't going to go out the door when Susan finally gives up ownership or leadership. So great point, Doug. So more than 5 years until retirement, no internal successors identified or internal succession plans in place. So these are some of the reasons to think about how do we take and embrace the next generations in the workforce, because this succession issue is real. And you think about the numbers of folks within your company in those top leadership roles, how many of them have a succession plan? If you're at an owner level, do you have your own succession plan and transition plan? Those are critical things to make sure that every generation is feeling safe and ready to take on that security in their role. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Simon Sinek. He is just a great mind. I love reading his books. He has some great work on starting with why, and he really gets down to the fact about how do we help everyone understand the why around what we're doing and why I'm doing what I'm doing. But he said, great leaders understand that their responsibility is for the people, not for the numbers, not for the results, but the people. If people feel like they are valued to the organization, their natural inclination is to work harder and contribute everything that they have. If they don't feel aligned, or they don't feel like they are your most important asset, you can be assured that they're probably not going to pass on a good message to your clients or your guests or your customers in whatever space you happen to be in. I'll give you an example of that. We spoke at a national or a state hotel and lodging association meeting on Monday of this week in the Rocky Mountains. And that industry, the hospitality industry, is very keenly aware that everyone in that company needs to feel engaged. They need to feel connected. They need to feel like they matter. Because if they don't, there is a direct impact on the guest experience. And I think all of us right now can probably think of at least one restaurant or hotel or some kind of hospitality type of a company that we've been at in the last maybe 6 months where maybe all of those employees don't feel like they're the most valued individual in that company or the most valued resource for that company. And we feel it. So it's important for us. This should not be just lip service for any of us. Most of us are people-driven organizations, whether you're in manufacturing, whether you're in hospitality, whether you're in financial services or construction or nonprofits. All of us should take a really strong look at, even as part of your major goals for your company, if you think about your vision and your strategy, this comprehensive workforce strategy should be a very strong element of it, and it can't be lip service. You really have to buy into this concept. If you're going to be successful winning this war against our workforce issues that we're facing now and will be facing for many years to come. So with that, I want to open it up to some questions. Anybody want to share any stories around how they feel like they're connected or disconnected with any of the generations or the generational personalities? I'll let you take the microphone.
You know, everybody's, as you said earlier in the program, everybody's needs people. There's not any business that I'm familiar with in the US that is not short of people and trying to figure out a way to recruit. And it just occurs to me, you know, one of the things that when we go through programs like this, it's sort of, you know, at some point people age out and retire. And I continue to kind of circle back to, is that really something we ought to be questioning too? Like, you know, what can we do to keep senior level people in some role, you know, even if it's part-time, even if it's remote. I mean, there's such a suck of brains and talent going out the door from here for the next 25 years. I mean, because the 46 to 64 births are, you know, just really starting to retire, and it's a wave. And I mean, I think about this in the context of construction a lot because, I mean, they, you know, they're, or, you know, really desperate for talent. They're having people age out at a higher rate than our industry. And I'm like, well, you need to figure out a way to keep them in, you know, keep that person, you know, in some role. And is there anybody that's really kind of at the forefront of that, you know, that's talking about that on a regular basis? Because I don't really see it as something that, you know, that is talked about in the context of workforce development, which is, you know, it's really how do we, you know, incentivize the young people, and we want to do all that, and we're doing those things, but I think I want to turn it on its head and say, well, how do we keep these other people until they're 75? And you know, I mean, because you know, 75's the person who lives to 75 now is the equivalent of 65 when I was a kid. You know, they're much healthier and active, and yes. So anyhow.
Yeah, great question, Doug. And I, you know, just from my perspective, I think of a couple of things. And if you look at all the generational personalities, and if we would go back to the baby boomer one, there are some really great components of that generation that we want to continue to bring forward. And the way that I see some of the best practices around that now, think about, we were talking about the diversity, equity, and inclusion. if you really have a strong, diverse workforce, you should always have some of those baby boomer brains participating in whatever, whether they come back and help out in certain projects or in certain areas of the company, or maybe they are on a part-time basis. You give them the opportunity to contribute at whatever level you'd like to, or they would like to. I mean, I'm seeing more and more, because we're seeing people live longer, you know, that old 62 to 65 retirement age. Heck, that's where you're really just starting to kick in, and you've got all this knowledge to share. So think about, in your comprehensive workforce strategy, how can you engage those brains and those people into what you're needing to do to be successful in your company? We see that a lot in the hospitality, in the hospitality industry. You know, they've got, retired moms and grandmas that are, so you know what? I just want to come and clean some rooms a day or two a week, or I'll come here and be a host or hostess for you for a little bit. If you're willing to flex what you would normally kind of perceive as the ideal candidate for those types of roles, and really think about the generational personalities of that generation, where could they fit in your company right now? The other way that I'm seeing that going really well, Doug, is in this new kind of gig workforce, where on-demand workforce, and we're seeing that within our company as well. You know, folks that typically when you retire, you're just kind of, okay, go on to your next journey in life, which is sometimes exciting, sometimes more scary, really, because I really don't know what the next journey of my life is going to look like. And it sure can't be as clear and exciting as what I'm doing right now in some cases. But think about that. When you're looking at that next journey in life, maybe it is a gig worker. Maybe it's an on-demand worker. Maybe you've got just a special group that you need to have someone with that diversity in thinking to participate in. So we're seeing that a lot by companies using more and more of a gig or an on-demand workforce. And I know there are companies here in the Southeast that's their business, is they're doing an on-demand workforce. So, okay, you need X number of workers today, you got a big project, or you're in manufacturing and you're now looking at, oh, wow, we've got to really ramp up this particular business line. All right, let's go and get some sourced on-demand workers. They come in that day or that week and they get paid that day or that week, and they're ready to go. So I think those are ways to really think about how you engage that boomer generation, but actually every generation. Because every generation wants to have that flexibility. They want to have that meaningful work. And maybe that's not the traditional 40 hours a week, 5 days a week, or, all of that, what we currently view as the ideal kind of work setting for us. Maybe it's the grandma that wants to work just on Saturdays or on Friday nights or on whatever. I think we have to think differently about that. Does that help?
I think it does. I mean, because it just occurs to me, I mean, we use a service where these are very experienced people.
Mhm.
I think we have, I don't know, 4 or 5 engaged regularly here, and they just don't want to go to the office anymore. They want to do more sort of, rote tasks, and it's great because we get somebody who's really experienced, and, it's a reasonable wage, and they work from home, and I'm just thinking, I'm not really aware of that in construction, but I don't know why somebody wouldn't think about, with tablets and everything, you could have a superintendent, walk the job with you virtually with a camera.
Yeah.
Because I mean, what we need to have happen is transfer all this knowledge before it's gone. I mean, and I don't know that a lot of companies are doing that in a really effective way. And if we can't do that, maybe we try to capture it back by some remote, technology and influenced way.
Yep. Well, and the other piece of that is making sure you've got a really strong succession plan in place so that, and when I say succession, I'm not only thinking about those individuals that are nearing retirement. I would say every key position within your company should have a documented succession plan. Basically, they should have the next individual identified to take on their role, and they should be actively engaging and training and developing so that if that individual would leave unexpectedly, because there are lots of other things going on in our world where they might just decide, you know what, I want to go elsewhere, or they get really ill and they need to be out of work for a while. I mean, we had a partner that merged into our firm. This was many years ago now. He headed up a whole division. He was only in his late 40s. We didn't even think about succession for that because I was like, oh, well, he's going to be here a long time yet. Well, he unfortunately had been diagnosed with a glioblastoma and he was gone in 9 months. Thankfully, we had a little time to kind of build that up, but you never know. So how have others been engaging, like the baby boomers or even those that have retired? Any other examples? Yes, ma'am.
I was going to touch on two things that weren't really impacted, that weren't really discussed in the presentation, but two things. One is, just the dealing with communication. One generation talking to another generation as far as, one might want to go ahead and send a long-winded email, which we're used to before, versus I'm going to come and sit and talk to you in the office versus no, just text it to me. And just knowing the way people want to be communicated to. And I think that's part of the challenge is, I talk to my son, I want to give him the long-winded answer. It's just like, just get to the point, which is, this is getting to the point,
And if it's more than 3 words, or 2 little acronyms, you've spoken too much.
Oh, yeah, it needs to be just LOL, or whatever it is. The other thing I think is just dealing with technology in general. When I think of my parents, I mean, I'm not going to go into the long story, but my parents accidentally ended up in a self-checkout line. They're in the 80s right now. They had no clue how to deal with the self-checkout line.
Oh, yes.
I mean, that's another generation being born in the 30s prior to the baby boomers. But I think there are those that, you mentioned using a tablet. There are lots of baby boomers that probably would not be comfortable with that, and maybe some of the Gen Xers, but completely different from someone that is a millennial or, being able to be far more comfortable with technology and having to figure out how to use that or not.
Yes. Well, I appreciate your comment on the communication styles because we didn't get into that level of depth, but I will tell you that there is definitely a difference in, I think of even within our company, some of the newest generation in our workforce. And there's a rare time where I don't see them with earbuds in, listening to music and doing things like that. And I sit there and I wonder, how can you do that and still concentrate on your work? But that's just the way they were raised. I mean, that's just what they were. Now, I was raised on a dairy farm, so you were always outside. You didn't have anything plugged into your ears or anything else. You were out working hard all day long. So, but it's just a different environment. But they expect to have crisp, clear messages in the least amount of words in many cases. But it also has to be an engaging message. And I mean, we could spend a whole day on communication strategies for each of the generations. But if you acknowledge that your message needs to be tailored to the audience, and you look at the approaches that might work best with each generation, even if you're a leader of a work group, and you're trying to say, okay, well, this team is made up of this kind of population of individuals and these diverse backgrounds. How do I make sure that that message is appropriate for all of them? How am I framing that in a way that each of them will embrace it? I think that those are great comments from that communication perspective. And also what engages one person in a generation may not engage the next person. And I can't emphasize enough that when you are trying to figure out how to engage a workforce, it has to be down to the individual level. And when you think about that, it comes through a strong performance management, performance engagement, and just a comprehensive workforce strategy. Because you should not only know what drives them as a team, but you should also know what drives them as an individual and where are their aspirations and how can you help them. I would say the best thing the 3 things a leader should be doing, they should be setting the vision for where the team's going to go. They should be giving them the tools and resources to help them get to where they need to go. And then they should just get out of the way so that they can get there and be there as a resource. And if we looked at that from each, whether it's generational, whether it's diversity in our population, if we look at them as an individual, and we customize, and I know that sounds like a whole heck of a lot of work because we got plenty of other things to do, But if you spend the time doing that, you're gonna be more successful at engaging your workforce. And the other point I would make is that because we've got such a transitional workforce right now, if you're not spending as much time recruiting your current team members as you are recruiting new team members, you're missing the boat. Because if you're not re-recruiting your current team members, you gotta know everybody else is, or so many other people are out there. And the recruiting tools right now are very digitalized. So, I mean, the scanning and recruiting, I mean, my daughter has been recruited, she's an HR business partner in the Midwest. And she's getting like things through recruiters that she's never signed up for. They're out there scanning LinkedIn profiles and they're scanning what you're posting. And I mean, so it's really easy to find your people. So if you're not re-recruiting them, you got to know someone else is out there recruiting them away from you. And it costs, I think the last statistic I saw for like a mid to upper level individual in a company, anywhere from $70,000 to $90,000 is the cost of recruiting a new individual into those roles. So think about that. If you got that much extra cash flow that you're going to be able to just kind of have that revolving door open, then don't spend a lot of time trying to re-recruit the people that you really need there. But you need everyone. Just remember that diversity is important because that's where you're going to get the greatest kind of minds around the room to be able to help you get to where you want to go. So, other questions, comments? Yes.
Question.
Yes.
And our doctors are our highest level.
Mm-hmm.
How can I convince my providers how important it is to create that succession plan? We have several individuals that we identified in practice that are next generation managers and leads. But our doctors are,
Mm-hmm.
they're like, everything's running great, just, kind of leave it alone and don't rock the boat. We don't need another manager or supervisor because then we'll be talking.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we just, we're working on it and we're trying to find ways that we can show them how important it is to bring along the next generation. Yeah, because I know I don't want to work for government.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to step away. And so, yes, we will step in. And my thought is, of course, we would prefer to do it from within because these people know our culture. Everybody knows them, that they have skills, they have the ambition to want to move up and do more. And I'm kind of stuck in the middle because I want to bring that next group along. But I have upper, these kind of like things are fine. But at the same time, I'm trying to let them know we're going to lose these people.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to stay. We're going to go find something else to do. How do you push through that wall?
So I'm empathizing with you only because I spent 12 years at Mayo prior to having the website. So I'm empathizing with you in the nicest way. So I heard you say a word that made me pause and you said, how do we persuade them? And I will tell you, you never persuade anybody. Persuasion is a short-term tactic. So when you think about it, if you think about moving from persuading to influencing, you think about it from a whole different perspective. And let me explain that. So first of all, they have to understand the problem that you're trying to solve. So give me an example of a problem you're trying to solve by bringing in and bringing up the next generation. Okay. So how does your, let's just say you've got one physician that's you're struggling with. How does your physician view the operation right now? Do they see any issues?
No.
Okay.
That's great.
So are you going to be able to influence them on that problem that's how you're going to solve this problem is through kind of this succession and bringing people up?
Well, I think they don't see a problem. Everything's running smoothly.
Yep.
And it's not a glaring, it's like anything, you can run on a tire that has a nail in it for a while. Or all the gears be set.
There you go.
I love
There you go.
So, we got a nail in the tire and it's still rolling.
Okay, so somehow in your influence strategy, you've got to make it out to be something that's important to them where they see the problem. So what's their why? So if you're sharing a rationale that makes no sense to them as your reason for needing to make the change, you're not going to get anywhere with them. No matter how vehemently you share that same message, they aren't going to connect to it because it's not their why. It's not their problem if they don't see it. So you have, in an influence strategy, you have to identify what makes it an issue for them. Why is that important for them? So now think of a couple of things that will make their lives easier or better, where they might feel some, maybe some tension or pain right now because you haven't done this.
Just even what you were saying, what is their why? And it just makes me think they're not even contemplating any kind of succession plan. I mean, are they gonna work forever? No, they're not gonna work forever either.
Well, but do they know that they're not, I mean, realistically,
Yeah.
don't some physicians think they're gonna work until they're 85 and 90 or till they can't walk anymore? And then they realize that, you know what, when I'm done, you can bring the next person in.
Right.
So depending on the mindset that they have.
Yeah.
So if their mindset is, I'm gonna work till whenever, well, gee, that person you wanna bring a successor up for is only like 42. Geez, they'll be working till they're 80 like I am.
Right.
So again, it's kind of the mindset that you're having to deal with from that generational personality. You probably have an easier time convincing someone in a different generation that isn't expecting to work until they're 70 or 80. But think of your generation that you're trying to influence and identify what's important to them. Why should they care about this? What will it help them do better? And that will help you with an influence strategy around it. But it has to be part of their why first. But I will commend you though, as you think about even within your staff, looking at how do you grow and develop them, because maybe that physician isn't thinking that that person's ever going to be disengaged and leave. But if one of their whys is, wow, they really want to make sure we retain that individual, then they have to understand that if that person leaves, it's going to negatively impact their practice as well. Because typically if they're working with that one provider, it will impact their practice because now they're going to be short of someone doing that role and their patients are going to be affected and their work is going to be affected. So kind of figure out where their why is and attach that to an influence strategy that's going to help them understand and embrace the why. Questions, comments before we wrap up? Nothing in the chat? Okay. Well, great.
Well, thank
You're
you
gonna
so much.
close up?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thanks to everybody for joining us for the program. Thanks to Tina for coming back and being with us today. I think there's some really good stuff to take back to your companies and think about, and hopefully some directions on some strategies you can deploy in your business. Please join us for our next Lunch and Learn with Clearwinds Technologies, which will be on September 14th. Clearwinds is an IT consulting firm, and we'll cover the latest HIPAA rulings and how to make sure your company's IT procedures and systems are compliant. Feel free to reach out to Katie if you have thoughts on a topic for a future program. We're always looking for fresh ideas in that regard, and we appreciate everybody coming out and participating. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.